Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Indie Zone. My name is Kathy. We have, for the better part of a year now, been covering a very important case before the United States Supreme Court called Hunter versus United States. This is one of the exceedingly rare petitions that thousands upon thousands of parties file in the Supreme Court each year. Some are civil, some, like the Hunter case, are criminal. There's only about 80 per year that get to oral argument where the Supreme Court has a public hearing and both sides' attorneys appear before the court one last time before a ruling is made in an attempt to persuade the justices to enter a ruling favorable to the petitioner, if we're talking Mr. Hunter, or the respondent, United States, if we're speaking of the United States. This case went to oral argument on March 3rd, 2026, just under 2 weeks ago. It was scheduled to go for 1 hour. It went for over 1 hour and 35 minutes to give an indication of how much the Supreme Court appeared to be interested in the proceeding, which is asking the court to provide a national policy, because there are disagreements amongst the appellate courts as to under what circumstances could a person like Mr. Hunter in this case, or Mr. Kohberger in Idaho versus Kohberger, who enter into plea agreements rather than going to trial. And as part of the plea agreement, the government requires that the defendant sign away appellate rights, meaning the defendant agrees not to seek an appeal regarding anything that happened at the trial court level or in the sentencing. The Supreme Court appeared to be rather interested in the case. There were lots of questions that were asked. There is now a page that you can go to on the Supreme Court's website to not just listen to oral argument, audio version, MP3, but there's also now a transcript from the court reporter who was at the proceeding and verbatim took everything down. The written transcript and the MP3, which will allow you to listen to the audio on replay as you're reading the transcript, is on the Supreme Court's website. I've attached a link to where you can go to get both in the description to this podcast episode. And it will allow you to hear such things as Justice Gorsuch commenting. It's a district court who says, I'm going to let an orangutan pick a sentence out of a hat. And then Ms. Jacoby, who was counsel for the United States, said, well, again, and before she could respond, Justice Gorsuch came back again and said, and you would say, no right to appeal that, right? There are so many other comments like this, questions like this, that I think may provide kernels of information as to how the Supreme Court may rule ultimately in Hunter versus United States. So I do encourage you to listen to the proceedings if you haven't had a chance to do so. Read the transcript, and we are continuing to monitor the docket for the opinion that comes down from the Supreme Court, which could change the law for people like Mr. Kohberger, who have very little grounds to ever seek an appeal of his sentence. There may be additional grounds that are listed here in this Hunter decision that might allow him some point down the line to appeal. Not that he has indicated anywhere that he would, but he might down the line, depending on how the Supreme Court rules or not. Again, depending on how the Supreme Court rules. This will now conclude this episode of the Indie Zone. Thanks for joining us here today.